Thank you all for being here. This is a discussion on why co-ops really are a fantastic way for our traditional communities to build successful businesses in this current capitalist economy. This is something that's really near and dear to my heart because when I was a very young man, about 18 or 19 years old, I had the opportunity to participate with cattle growers and local villagers on the Pecos River in Guadalupe County in New Mexico, and helped start a co-op called the Lower Pecos Valley Farmers Consumers Cooperative. And what we were trying to do was to help our community get food at lower prices. It was a food co-op, and we also had a gas station to try to force the local, there was two other small grocery stores, force those merchants to lower their prices because we were 45 miles from the closest services, Las Vegas and Santa Rosa. So I saw at a very early age, I was about 18 or 19, that there was incredible power in co-ops. And that's why here at the center, we try to work with our communities to encourage them to start their own co-ops. And we're going to talk about why I think it's important to do co-ops as opposed to LLC or a subchapter S or a sole proprietorship, and what those benefits can be for our communities. Next slide, please. And there we go. Why co-ops are a good idea for Indigenous and Chicano peoples and communities. I learned from that very first co-op that one of the things that a co-op can do, can you go back to the other one? Go back to that, there you go. I learned that co-ops are a way for people to own their own businesses, and that it serves a number of purposes. What we've learned in New Mexico over the last 10 or 15 years of working in rural communities and with our gente is that there's really no reliable day labor market. It's really hard to find people that come in and work for a day at 10 or 12 hours, $10 or $12 an hour, because farming is very hard, for example, but regardless of what the business is, it's just hard to find people that are available, that are healthy, that are willing to come and work for you. In a co-op, because you own it, every member has one vote and owns it, there's an incentive for you to want to show up and do the work because you're the owner. And at the end of the day, you not only get paid, but at the end of the year, you also share in the profits. So co-ops are a great way to try to solve the issue we face in New Mexico of not having a day labor market. So co-ops is a great way for the members, are also the workers. Members, workers, it's interchangeable, and you hold each other responsible for making sure the work gets done. So that's one really good reason for co-ops to exist. Another is that co-ops can help an entire community rise economically. If it's just me farming in Truchas and I decide to move to California because I want to live near the ocean, well then if it's just me and it's just my business, I just close it and I leave, and that resource I was building for the community disappears with me. But in a co-op, I can leave, other members can leave, but there's a core of us that are always there that helps the community rise and that creates stability so that the entire community benefits over time, and that multiple families are benefiting from this economic work, not just one family, but multiple families then, and you can help smaller villages really rise economically if you're working as a co-op as opposed to an LLC or a subchapter S. And then there's longer term issues, and not so long. I thought the end of modernity, where we're so oil dependent and where we're getting tomatoes shipped from as far away as China, and we're getting cucumbers from Africa, and Mexico's sending us all kinds of stuff, that was going to go on forever, that all I had to do was get in my car and drive to the nearest grocery store, and I would be able to buy my tomatoes, my cucumbers, and not even give it a second thought. But the pandemic that we're currently in and that we've suffered for in the last 2 or 3 years has shown us that this global economy is really very fragile. It's a very fragile thing. And as a result of that, I think we are going to reach what Kunstler wrote a book called The Long Emergency, James Kunstler. And in it, he says that we're going to wake up one day and find out that we're no longer going to be able, we're going to live in a society that has no access to oil. So that means that the modernity, all the technology, all the things we're used to, all the comforts we have now are going to go away because we don't have fossil fuels to power our economies. So in that situation, which I think we've had a taste of during the pandemic, we're beginning to see that there's shortages, that prices go up. Gas is now at $4 a gallon. It's going to go down a bit, but how much more? We'll probably never get below $3 a gallon moving forward. And that's only going to get worse with time. So as a result of that, we're going to have to rely on each other for basics, for food, for everything, transportation. We're going to have to really get to know our neighbors. And the great way to do the economics of that is through co-ops. And then finally, co-ops are a way for us as indigenous peoples and as Mexicanos, Chicanos, is to then create models, for a post-capitalist economy. Right now, I believe we're in the late stages of capitalism because it's not sustainable. And the planet can no longer continue to have this unfettered exploitation of its resources for profit. And so we are in the late stages of capitalism, and we have to start thinking now in our communities of what are some of the models that will help us get to a point where we can model for other people how we can thrive and survive in a post-capitalist economy. And co-ops are a beautiful, perfect model for doing that. So, no, go back to the previous one, please. So co-ops really are just formal business models that mimic and that ape indigenous and Mexicano cultures and communities. For example, in Mexico, there's the ejidos, where these are land grants given to mostly indigenous and Mexicano communities where they cannot alienate the land base, and where people then work communally and together to build their economy and to sustain their ejidos. In New Mexico, we call them Mercedes or land grants and acequias. Acequias are another communal model. So we have, in indigenous communities, they have clans and kinship, and they have acequias, and they do everything in groups and in communities. So it's not one person taking responsibility for the major structures in our communities, it's all of us, and that's been part of our history. So co-ops are a way in a modern capitalist system for us to use models that we're already familiar with, that come out of our culture, that we know, acequias, Mercedes, land grants, ejidos, clans, kinship, all of that is something that goes back centuries for us. So it's easy for us to say, oh, a co-op is just like the acequia or the land grant. Absolutely. They're communal models that help benefit the entire community. So that's why it's a great idea for us to try to use co-ops, because it's just a formal economic model that really extends what we already know in our culture and that we actually are practicing in our current culture. Next slide, please. So now our challenge at the center and for our communities is, how do we incorporate these communal practices? You know, we know how to go out together and clean the acequia in the spring. They're doing that right now across northern and central New Mexico, and also through our Puebloan communities. So how do we incorporate these communal models within the existing capitalist system? And we do it through what we call a cooperative. Next slide, please. So there's different types of co-ops, different types of cooperatives. So there's retail cooperatives, for example, or a type of a consumer cooperative, which help create retail stores to benefit consumers. So for example, the biggest example we have here locally is La Montanita. It's a food co-op. They have about 16 or 17,000 members. And when I join as a member, then I'm an owner. I get to vote on who the board of directors is. I can talk to the board of directors whenever I want. If I don't like what's going on, I have a voice. There's an annual meeting. I get to go in and voice my issues. If I don't like the tomatoes they're selling, I think or the quality isn't what I'd like it to be, I can go. There's a way for me, because I'm not just a consumer. I'm not just a person coming in off the streets to buy my groceries. I own the co-op and I have a voice in exactly what they do. That's a big benefit. Also in La Montanita, depending on how much you buy, if let's say you buy $1,000 worth of groceries at La Montanita, at the end of the year you get a benefit from them, and you get to go back in and they give you credit. So you'll get, let's say if I spend $1,000, you'll give me $200 worth of credits for me to go back and buy food. I get the profits, I get to share in the profits, and I get to go back and I save $200 in my grocery bill every year because I'm a member and the co-op did well. So it's just a great way. Co-ops, a food co-op, a retail co-op is a way for us to get needed services like food, for example, at a rate that usually can be lower, but that gives me personal benefits and that I have a voice in. Next slide. So then there's workers' cooperatives. Workers' cooperatives is where the employees of the business also own the business. So we helped start Los de Mora Growers Cooperative, and now they also have a grocery store in Mora where they sell. So it's the owners and the growers who own this cooperative. They're the owners, but they're also the workers. They hire their own members to run the store, to take all their stuff to market, and all of that. And we helped that get going probably about 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And the examples of worker cooperatives are like bakeries, retail stores, aquaculture co-ops. I mean, some of these are interchangeable. You can call them retail worker, but a worker co-op is where the workers own the means of production and they own whatever net profit comes out of it. Okay, next slide. Producer cooperatives is a lot of what we're doing. Organic farming, that's where producers decide to work together. So if we get Ezequiel Chavez, for example, together with some of our other farmers, Gerald Lucero, Lucero Pueblo, or others, they can bundle their organic product together through a producer co-op, and then that gives them better access to markets. They get better price because they can produce more volume of product, and that's a great way so it can increase their marketing possibilities and their efficiencies. So they can buy one big tractor and just move it back and forth between the farms instead of everybody having to buy their own tractor. So producer cooperatives are a lot of what we are pushing and that we really promote. And producer cooperatives are organized to process and market and distribute their own products. And that's what we're doing with a lot of our farmers. So examples, of course, are agricultural products, lumber, carpentry, crafts, that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. So service cooperatives are a kind of consumer co-op, but this helps fill a need. And when I was a younger man with young children, we were part of a childcare center where you had to sign up and be a member, and you had to provide services for the kids. You had to spend so many hours a week actually providing daycare under the supervision of hired staff, but you'd have to be an aide. You'd have to be helping in the classroom with the kids and in the daycare, and you had to be bringing in snacks and you had to be helping, but it lowered your rate. Instead of paying full rate to take care of my kids, I got a real huge benefit, and it took my time and effort to do it, but it was a really great help to our family because we were on a very limited budget. So it's a way for us to get services, more services than we may be able to afford in the marketplace. So healthcare clinics, funeral service, childcare centers, these are all examples of service cooperatives. Next slide, please. Housing co-ops, we don't have many of those in New Mexico. There's one that I know of in Albuquerque. It's a complex with a lot of condos and everything. But this summer I was able to stay in a housing co-op in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, and there's a lot of co-ops up in the upper ranges of the American Midwest. Co-ops are really popular there. They've taken hold there. There's huge agribusiness co-ops there, but there's all kinds of housing co-ops as well. And that's fantastic because there people can, you end up owning, let's say, a building that has 50 rental units, and you buy into the co-op and you get to pay very reduced rent. And what you have to do is you have to provide service to maintain the gardens, to maintain the building, and you share the costs of the mortgage with everybody else. So you're not having to pay a full mortgage. Your costs come down because there's 50 or 100 of you paying off the mortgage on that building. And they're just fantastic. And the great thing about housing co-ops, you can't sell them for profit. When you want to leave the co-op because you made more money and you're going to go buy a bigger house, you just get a limited amount of that money back. Here in Albuquerque and Old Town, we have the Sawmill Community Land Trust. I was a founding member of their board for their first 10 or 11 years. And there, when it helps people that have lower income get into their own home, and they build some equity, but not full equity. But it's a way to get them started so they can qualify to get conventional financing over time. But it belongs to this cooperative. And it's just a really great idea. So condos, rentals, single family homes can all be housing co-ops. Next slide. So there's cooperative principles that have emerged internationally over the years. Now these really are mimicking what has happened. As I go back to my first point, in our communities, we've had these principles for centuries. This is nothing new to us, because we've known this for centuries. We've known these principles and we've tried to incorporate them. Now, we don't always succeed at it because we're human like everybody else, and no particular group is exceptional. That means no one group is better or holier or smells better than any other group. We can all be selfish, we can all be mean, we can be greedy, but we've had these principles, as you'll see, in our acequias, in our clans, and in our indigenous and Mexicano Chicano communities for centuries. So cooperatives around the world operate on the same set of core principles and values set up by the International Cooperative Alliance. Next slide. So principle 1 is open and voluntary membership. That means membership in a co-op is open to all the people who can reasonably use its services and stand willing to accept the responsibilities of membership, regardless of race, religion, gender, or economic circumstances. Now, there's a caveat to that. The co-op members that formed the original co-op can say, well, yes, we do believe in this principle and we can accept people regardless of race, religion, but we have to have a 2/3 vote of the existing members to let someone in. So there's ways for you to control the membership so that if you get somebody that you know is very toxic or that's going to cause a lot of problems and isn't worth having them in, if the 2/3 of the membership say, Juanito, hijo, es muy problemático, a lo mejor no, I don't want him in the co-op, and if he can't get 2/3 of the vote, well then you know what, he's not in. But basically it is open and voluntary membership. Like La Montanita Co-op, I can go, and the fact that I'm a left-handed Mexican over the age of 70 will not stop me from getting in. They can't discriminate against me as long as I accept the responsibilities of membership and I pay my fee. Next. So principle 2 is democratic member control. So that means we're democratic organizations controlled by their members, and members actively participate in setting policies and making decisions. It's like a board of directors, but the members are the board of directors. Although if you get big enough, you elect a board of directors to represent you. But representatives and trustees are elected among the membership, and in primary cooperatives, members have equal voting rights. So the thing about co-ops is you only have one if you get one membership and you only get one vote. I can't accumulate memberships. I can't buy out Juanito's membership or Sarita's membership and get 3 votes. No, I can only have one membership and one vote, and I cannot pass that membership on to my children or my grandchildren. Cannot do it. When I die, that membership disappears. So it's totally democratic. It's one person, one vote. So, and at other levels, it's based on democratic principles. So it's the idea of one person, one vote, period. Next. Members' economic participation. So the thing about co-ops is members contribute equitably to and democratic control the capital. So at least part of that capital remains the common property of the cooperative. So in a co-op, you need to have cash reserves for next year to buy. Let's say it's a farming co-op, you got to buy seeds next year. You might need to repair the tractor. So all of you agree collectively what percent of the net is going to go into a reserve fund, so we have enough money to start off next year, and we're never starting from zero. And all of that capital, net profit that you don't pay out as payments to yourself, becomes common property of the co-op. So you can use the surplus for all kinds of stuff to benefit members in proportion to what they participated in. And here's the difference: it's not an equal distribution of income. It's an equitable distribution. That means if Juanito puts in his tractor and 400 hours a season in the co-op, in the farming co-op, and I put in 40 hours because I'm off doing other things, I don't get the same amount of net profit at the end of the year as Juanito. He gets 400 hours worth and I get 40 hours worth. It's equitable. It's based on what I put in. That's what I get back. So it's not like, oh, we're all communal. Juanito, thank you for putting in 400 hours in your tractor, but too bad. We're all going to get the same amount of money. No, it's based on how much we each put into the co-op that determines how much we get back as a net. So it's a great way to encourage personal initiative, and you're not making people feel like they're being taken advantage of, because they will benefit from the effort that they put in, time and effort. They will get it back at the end of the year. That's great because it provides that personal incentive for people. Next. Autonomy and independence, very important. People talk a lot about this, but there's not a lot of it floating around. So cooperatives are autonomous self-help organizations. They're controlled by their members, always. If the co-op enters into agreements with other organizations, or we raise capital from other sources, banks, whatever it is done so based on terms that ensure democratic control by the members, and maintains always has to maintain the cooperative's autonomy. You don't want to get a loan that if we default, then all of our shares go to the bank or anything. You just don't do that, because it's important. One of the most important principles is autonomy and independence of the co-op always. Next principle. Education and training. So co-ops is not just a way for us to meet a specific need to help our economy, to help us with daycare, to help us buy groceries, whatever the co-op happens to be, but it's also a way for us to provide education and training for members, just so that they can contribute effectively to the development of their cooperative. And we generally need to let the general public know about the nature and benefits of co-ops. Co-ops are very, very strong in the US, especially in the Midwest, but they've become very huge enterprises. They become agribusiness, and they've lost really these principles. They've lost a lot of these principles because they become agribusiness. They become so huge that they've lost sight of why they were originally formed. So we believe in smaller co-ops where you get to know the other members, you have influence, you know your voice is being heard. And education and training is one of the best ways to keep educating yourselves about what the principles are in a co-op, and what my responsibilities and my privileges are as a co-op member. Next slide. Cooperation among cooperatives. So we don't only want to serve each other. We want to look for opportunities to work with other co-ops to keep building international structures, larger markets, whatever it might be. So we're always looking to work with other co-ops to help each other and see how we can be of service to each other. And there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that, because you can cross from an agricultural co-op, you can sell to a childcare co-op, you can sell your product to a childcare co-op, and you're feeding those kids and you're giving a better price than they would get in the retail market. Next. Concern for community, very important in co-ops. This is one of the founding principles of co-ops, is we can't just worry about our own needs. That co-ops aren't there just for meeting the co-op members' needs, but we really want to work for sustainable development of our communities. So we want to do policies and programs that are accepted by the members. More recently, in response to changing market conditions, some co-ops in the US have experimented with modifying these principles. That happens because these principles were first adopted in the 1600s and times have changed. So for example, some co-ops have used closed membership to maximize efficiency. And that happens, profitability and return on member equity investments. And some new cooperative laws in some states have granted voting rights to non-user investors. So that's sort of a different take on what the traditional co-ops are. Next. This is, I'm not going to get into this, but I put it in there because it's really important. This is comparing different business structures, and it gives you really good detail all the way across between everything from LLCs, subchapter S's, co-ops to nonprofits, and it goes straight down the list of what the benefits are to each, what's good about some, what's stronger, what some are better at than others. But I recommend that you really look at that closely because it's a great way for you to get good education right on this page of what the different opportunities or options you might choose for your business. I'm pushing co-ops because I see a larger vision for our communities to regain their health and to be healthy. But there's a lot of other ways that you can do these businesses. And this page is comparing business structures is a great way on one page for you to actually see that laid out, and you can make your own decisions based on what you see here. Next. So the legal structure of any business defines ownership, control, and earnings distribution. So like other businesses, a co-op incorporated as a legal entity under state statutes, which provide a framework for governance and operations. Statutes are not uniform. Every state is different. There's no overall federal law governing co-ops. Every state has their own laws. In New Mexico, it's about 2 pages of statutes, page and a half. There's not a lot devoted to it. It's pretty general. So it gives you a lot of leeway to operate, but it's also very vague. So it's not necessarily a great thing, but it does give us the opportunity to create co-ops, and there is about 2 pages worth of statutes in New Mexico governing co-ops. The ownership and control of most businesses related to the level of equity investment. So again, I talked about this earlier. If we're doing a farming co-op, Ezequiel, and you put in 400 hours and I put in 40, well, then your return is going to be tied to the equity you put in, the investment you put in, whether it's money you put in, or whether it's time, or whether it's expertise, or in a farming co-op, if we use your tractor, or you lend us your land, there's a value attached to that, and you're going to get paid in terms of, in proportion to what you put in. That's because it shouldn't be equal. I shouldn't get the same amount of net profit that you do, Ezequiel, because you put in 10 times more than I did. So you need to get 10 times more back. That's a pretty basic concept, but some people mistakenly think that co-ops mean I get exactly the same as Ezequiel, even though I couldn't show up. Yo soy flojo. I didn't get up on time. I don't have a shower. No sé, no quise ir. Soy flojo. No quise ir. Well, I shouldn't get the same as Ezequiel, and you don't. In a co-op, you don't. It's equitable distribution of net, not equal. Important to know that. Next. Okay. So in some states here in New Mexico, for example, cooperatives are incorporated as a type of nonprofit corporation. Since a cooperative's primary orientation is to benefit members by providing goods or services at cost. However, unlike traditional nonprofits, which legally have no owners, nonprofit cooperative business statutes provide for member ownership and member rights, including voting, profit distribution, and rights to assets sold. So when you incorporate as a nonprofit in New Mexico, you have articles of incorporation, but you also have bylaws. And the bylaws are, and they're attached to this presentation. There's good copies of actual bylaws we're using now with co-ops. That's where you spell out how you're going to run the business, the co-op, the business end of a co-op. the bylaws spell that out so that there's no question about who does what to whom and what are my rights and how we're going to run the business of a co-op. Next. So agricultural cooperative bylaws are 10 articles. Membership, board of directors, meetings, waiver of notice, amendments, disposition, indemnification, disposition of property, and dispute resolution. Very basic, and you can get this form from the Secretary of State, and all you have to do is fill in the blanks with your name and member numbers and all that. Real simple, easy to incorporate as a nonprofit in New Mexico. Next. And the bylaws, here's where the bylaws kick in. The bylaws are the guidelines. How are we going to run the business of the co-op? What do we say about how we're going to do it? And let's write it out so that there's no question about that. And I've attached copies of several of the cooperative bylaws that are actually being used currently by some of our co-ops in New Mexico. And it's not a lot of pages, but it's enough so that you know as a member, what are my rights and how are we going to do the business of the co-op? Next. Questions. All right, I got through it in almost half an hour, maybe, yeah, right at half an hour. That's what they told me. Don't go on forever, they said, and I haven't. So I'm happy to answer any questions because I've loved co-ops. I've been able to participate in forming maybe 20 or 30 co-ops over these last 55 years, maybe more. I lose track. Ya me estoy haciendo viejo. But I love co-ops, and I've seen the power of co-ops over the years. And I think that's where the future is going to drive us anyway. So we should get ahead of the curve as we can and form these co-ops and build our community, build our own communities back, get our families organized, get our neighbors organized. And we can do it through a formal business structure called a co-op. So I'm a co-op guy now. I was a co-op guy then, and I'll always be a co-op guy. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Ezequiel no tiene preguntas, joven ilustre.
No, todo está bien, no, ya mi hija me está explicando todo lo que está haciendo, pero
Muy bien.
está muy bien lo que explica porque así no debe de ser un grupo de agricultores. Yo trabajaba en la placita en unos años atrás y me traían los niños de las escuelas y yo les daba clases, les daba entrenamiento. Me traían los muchachos de menores de la cárcel de menores y también les daba entrenamiento.
Qué bueno.
Es casi lo mismo.
Qué bueno.
Sí, le tengo una preguntita. Me quería registrar para las clases que, pues los trainings que iba a dar de gratis, pero dice que que necesito permiso para poder hacer sign up.
Are you talking about the backyard Sembrando Salud?
It says lunchtime training. It was sent in the email that was sent to us, and it just has like a link to register. And I tried to register, but it doesn't let us.
Catering, I think that's Sembrando Salud, right?
No, it's it was a way that we were trying to capture the evaluation. So I can resend it though, and just double check the link. But it's just a few quick questions about co-op knowledge and what people might want to learn.
Okay. So that link was for this training?
Yeah, but it's fine if you don't review that for this training, but we'll probably send out, just so you're aware, another really quick survey so we can get an idea of if these are helpful for people.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, this presentation will be on our website. You can refer back to it. If you're having trouble sleeping, you can just go back to this presentation and that'll help you. It'll help you get plenty of rest at night. But really, co-ops are a model that really, as I say, exists in our cultures. We don't formalize them, but they're there. They're acequias, they're land grants, they're ejidos. We've had them as part of our indigenous and Mexicano cultures for centuries. So this is a way for us to formalize those practices in an existing legal framework that's absolutely permitted in the US. And that's it. That's all I've got.
Oh,
If there's
one
no
last
further
thing.
questions.
One last thing, Bianca. Sabes que I was going through the email, and I think the other training that you might be interested in, and as well for Mr. Bryce, would be next week, the 27th. We're going to have a Codes at Lunchtime training, and this one's going to be on business and finance. Y va a ser 11:45 a.m. to 12:45. And oh, that's the next slide. Never mind. I guess they're going to talk about it. But yeah, we're more than invited to that one as well. It's going to be really interesting.
We misspelled business, but I hope the numbers are right. We just misspelled the word business. Business. So we need to fix that. Yes, so we have 3 accountants on staff, all fantastically formally trained, educated, fully bilingual. And one of our accountants is Alejandra Sasueta, and she is going to do a longer presentation on best business practices, because as any co-op has to have a good knowledge of what is required of you in terms of business, in terms of taxes. What do budgets? You have to have budgets, and you have to know what those mean, and you're able to manage them. So we've developed a really fantastic basic introduction to small business management, and we'll be doing that April 27th, and that's going to be another noontime presentation. That's going to be an hour because that's a little more complicated, but all of this is going to be available to you both online. If any of you want either the co-op presentation, and next week after you get the business finance training, we can also send you a hard copy. We can send you a hard copy of these presentations so that you have them. If you're more comfortable being able to go through them, we'll make those available to you as well. And we can have them for you in both English and Spanish.
I would actually like those. If I could have a copy, I would really appreciate it.
All right, great. We will do so. Anything else, catering?
I don't think so. Thank you for spending time with us, and please look out in your emails. Sometimes our mass emails might go to your spam or junk folders, so also take a look in there in case maybe you're missing them. But April 27th, we'll be happy to host you again for the business and excuse me, finance training. And of course, you can always reach out to Emma and Jose or Yolanda to get hours, to get help with any other services that Codese provides.
All right. Thank you, guys.